by training, I am a consulting CFO with Danforth Advisors. So I focus on companies that are at the intersection of healthcare and AI. And then my, I guess, moonlighting job has been really to focus on figuring out how do we advance AI in the field of finance. And so my training, I've had 20 years of experience in finance and also data science. And so over the past few years, I've been really exploring how do we figure out how to use these tools, which moved from originally machine learning, but we'll get into more of what they are today, which is GenAI. And how do we use them from a finance perspective to make them more productive for us? So some of the stuff we'll go over, because this is really geared towards how AI applies to us as finance professionals and executives, is we'll go over basically where we are today with AI. And so you've probably all seen this, but everyone keeps talking about how AI is the future. And if AI is the future, how are we actually competing? And so we'll talk about how are we maximizing AI's value in finance. So we'll understand which of the finance functions are going to see the biggest impact from AI, and also how do we avoid one-size-fits-all solutions. We'll talk about a little bit about how AI is impacting our workforce, how it's impacting talent strategy, because I'm sure you've all heard AI will replace all of us to AI is going to help us. And so we'll kind of talk about the reality around what's going on with that. And then we'll also talk about kind of the good to the great things that are happening with AI, as well as some of the stuff that's kind of a little odd. And then we'll talk a little bit about practical implementations. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll actually do a case study, and then we'll go into some of the, what do we call the large language models, and test it out from a finance perspective. So one of the things I like to start off with, and then we'll see if the Zoom poll works, is really polling the audience. And then if it doesn't work, we'll put the answers in the chat. But I really want to understand kind of where we are to level set. So from an AI expertise perspective, go ahead and let me know, are you a level 1, which is like AI curious? So you kind of heard the acronyms. You may occasionally use some of these AI tools. Do you consider yourself an AI expert? So like you're using these tools frequently, you're using them for work, you're using them for home or school, or are you an AI, basically what we call automator? So somebody who's really kind of built out these tools, you're actually thinking about implementing them in your workforce and everything like that. So if you can go ahead and answer the poll, we'll give that a few minutes. Great, that's awesome. So most people are kind of curious. So we've heard about it, we've seen it, we've maybe tested it out, but we still kind of are on the learning curve. So what is this stuff called GenAI? So GenAI is basically a rapidly advancing technology that what it does is it takes information using a tool called natural language processing, and it generates new data or new information from information you give it. And so what I mean by that is, like, for example, if you go ask it a question, so if you see like ChatGPT on your phone or on the internet and you say like, please do some financial analysis, it can actually appear like it's thinking on its own. And so really that's what we've been seeing here over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's getting faster and faster. And so what, by having GenAI come out about, is given us new different applications for everything from the financial analysis, like I just mentioned, to some of the more interesting applications, which we'll get into, which include like human machine interactions, and then really different things that we never thought about before.
Juliana, this is Tariq. I'm just going to interrupt this for 1 second.
Yeah.
We will be sharing these slides, so you guys don't need to frantically make notes if you don't have to. Just thought I mentioned that.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'll give you the slides, it'll have links, and so you'll be great from there. And then please, as you guys think of questions, this is the more questions you can think of, it's even better too. And so as we think about opportunities for where AI and finance are starting to intersect, we're seeing it intersect in kind of a couple, I'd say 4 to 5 core areas. The first one being, I'd say like on the financial reporting side. So we're seeing GenAI come up around like technical accounting, for example. So you can use GenAI to do accounting analysis. You can use it to help standardize your reports. You can also use it to identify anomalies or trends in your financial data. to some of the other applications we're now using it for is like forecasting and budgeting. So you can have AI algorithms that can go analyze reams of historical data. It can predict market trends, and it can also generate forecasts and also predict future budgets. And then some of the more interesting applications as well are taking away some of what we've seen is at lower level, like transactional level work. So there's automation around accounts payable, around accounts receivable, and then also figuring out risk management. So finding ways to analyze large data sets and then predict and manage where are those areas that we need to think about from a compliance perspective.
Julianne, can I ask a quick question? So for those different areas, should we expect that the only way to apply them to any of our companies is with some tailor-made AI tools other than ChatGPT?
So that's a good question, David. So that's one of the applications is, do you use the tailor-made tools or do you use like off-the-shelf tools? Is that kind of your question?
Yeah. And actually it's really, yes, in particular, what are there good off-the-shelf tools that can be used for these 5 areas that you laid out?
Yeah. And so we'll get into a couple examples. And so there are some so what's happening right now is there are some off-the-shelf tools being built, and that's kind of the next wave of iterations. So of course you first have what we're calling like our foundation layer. So it's almost like the way to think about it is similar to when the internet came out in the late to early 90s. And those are like your chat GPTs of the world. Your Claude is Anthropic's model. You have Gemini, which is Google. So you have all of those. And those can do basically anything and everything. And they can do them more or less well. So like, for example, OpenAI can build you an Excel model, and Claude can tell you how to build the Excel model, but it can't actually generate the Excel. So it's really kind of like, okay, those are kind of like your everyday workhorses. Then you have other tools which are embedded within, I'd say, like the enterprise tools we've seen, and we'll get into one of those in a minute, like, for example, QuickBooks. So QuickBooks is actually using AI within its existing systems. And so that's kind of what we're seeing too. And then on the, I'd say, more like broader end, then we have actual AI tools that are being built for specific purpose. So one of the tools that I recently saw was called Vera. And what Vera does is actually manage, it's an AI tool that manages onboarding for clients around systems. So it's like document tracking. So it's kind of like you're seeing a little bit of AI in everything right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so some of the 2025 trends we're starting to see, at least with finance, in addition to some of the tools I just mentioned, is we're also seeing more applications around how to make AI interact more with humans and also how to make it think and respond in a way that's more independent of humans. And so what I mean by that is prior to this last evolution with GenAI, you had to basically go tell it to do something. So you had to say, okay, I want you to analyze the last 3 years of financial trends. And so you'd have to walk it through, here's how to do it. Nowadays, what's coming out is you have these things that are called everything from agents to personas to basically digital twins. And what these are is these are basically technology that can think and operate on its own or with limited human interactions. And so what I mean by that is like an example is an AI-powered financial advisor. And so that's an example of that is like a robo-advisor that can sit there and analyze your portfolio and give you recommendations on here's the different kinds of stocks you can pick, to all the way this is still being evolved, but there's actually teams of agents that can sit through and figure out how to do different kinds of trading strategies and then how to execute on trading within the market. So then when we think about that different spectrum of agentic AI versus Gen AI, this agentic AI, which you guys are going to hear a lot about this year, because you have everybody from Salesforce building this to even OpenAI building this, is agentic AI really kind of operates on its own, and it operates as an autonomous decision maker. So you can go tell it kind of similar like an intern, you're like, okay, I want you to execute a task and build a budget model for me, and it will go do that. So that's kind of where that's at right now. So then when we think about the two differences between where it's moving from like Gen AI to agentic AI to kind of like further beyond that, we have different tools that like include everything from what ChatGPT is doing to what I just mentioned with the robotic AI advisors or even customer service agents. So then, as I was mentioning with Intuit, and I can kind of show you this too, is Intuit has actually implemented AI within its systems. And so one of their focus areas this year is they really want to say, okay, we want to implement AI as much as possible. So they're at the stage where they've said, we want to create what they call AI agents, which will replace CFOs and chief marketing officers. So that's probably for them on their roadmap about 2 years out. And so what they're doing when they think about, okay, what does their implementation pathway look like? They have created something they call an AI invoice generator. And so that, for example, and I'll go to this, it can really help you with automating some of your workflows. So for example, prior to having the AI, you'd have to actually enter the data in for QuickBooks. Now you can come over here and you could do like, okay, I want to type in all this information. And you can click on autofill. And if this works, so also, by the way, the thing with doing live examples is sometimes the AI acts up on you. Is that it actually will populate within the correct parameters. So what it just did was when I wrote my notes in, or what these example notes were, was around, okay, I wanted to say, here's my billing invoice for driveway work, demolition work, 400 units at $3,800 total, and send to this person. It went ahead and put everything into the exact required areas for the invoice. Whereas before, somebody would have to go in and transactionally like type that all in. And then, so then the other trend that's coming up in 2025 is everyone is trying to figure out what is the build out of what's really this foundation layer. So these large language models. So like who is really, when we think about where finance is going to end up and like where GenAI is going to end up, what is that tool we're going to use? And so what we're seeing here is we're seeing kind of a bit of a battle for basically our technology. And so lately it's playing out over the past couple of weeks with OpenAI, for example, as well as Elon Musk. And Elon Musk has a competitive company called XAI. So in January, OpenAI and SoftBank actually entered into a partnership with the White House to build out data centers in the US to increase capacity for AI. And then even this last week or so, Musk decided to actually enter into an unsolicited bid to help to say that he wanted to actually buy OpenAI. So we're seeing this play out here, whereas the costs and the value of this foundation models and these LLMs get more valuable, more and more of the tech individuals want to ultimately own it. And so as this was playing out, what also came up, because everybody thought everything was so expensive, was an LLM that came out of, interestingly enough, an international one out of China. So we had DeepSeek, which just popped up over a random weekend, and this showed up, and instead of it costing hundreds of billions of dollars, this one was built at a cost of $6 million. The reports are a little bit off, but they're saying it took anywhere from 2 to 4 months, and it was built on older technology. So what this particular thing did, DeepSeek, which is also an LLM, so it's just like ChatGPT, it showed that the technology can actually be built in a similar manner, but for cheaper and faster, and also in an open source technology. And then, by the way, it also caused a giant dip in the market too. So that was kind of interesting from that perspective. So what it's doing now is we're seeing a lot of competition come out. And so what that all means for us from finance individuals is, as we think about what tools we choose, is really when we think about what we're building, we want to build our technology stack in a way that is really kind of foundation agnostic. So whether we choose one like that's cheaper, such as DeepSeek, or one that is like ChatGPT or Claude or things like that, we really want to think about, okay, what is the longer term applications of what we're choosing. And then I'd say the other trend that's coming up this year is, in addition to humans using AI, AI has now kind of stepped out of the computer and into the robotics lab. And so this is an example of an AI pet. Its name is Jenny. And then this one is interesting because it's a cross between an AI pet, but also a medical device. And so what this does is it partners with seniors on elder care, and they're working on getting it approved through the FDA to help out with mental health. And so there's lots of examples of this. This one is particularly a dog, but they have like humans as well and things like that, where machines and AI are really helping people figure out how do they provide compassion, how do they help out with empathy? And really there's a lot of things coming up around like human machine interactions too. So then we think about where that could lead us with finance. What does that all mean for us? So someday, I know everybody's heard this, we keep hearing about, okay, what does this AI finance assistant look like? So do we have a finance assistant who can do financial analysis? Do we get that finance robot? What does that future look like for all of us? And how do we implement that now versus the future? So when we think about preparing our finance teams for AI adoption, the things to really keep in mind are a couple items. First of all, thinking through what roles are going to be enhanced by AI, what's going to be disrupted by AI, what new skills do we want to have, and then really thinking through how do we, what's called reskill and upskill the finance workforce. And so by reskilling and upskilling, where it used to be probably about 4 or 5 years ago, team members would have to go learn like coding, for example. And what you'll see when we go to the examples, you don't actually have to learn coding anymore because the AI can do coding. What you do need to learn is skills that all of us already have, which are how to manage people, how to talk to people, and how to really understand critical thinking. Because the way these tools all work is, since they're generative AI and they're built on natural language, a lot of it is around interactions and conversing. And a lot of them don't have rule books. So a lot of it is, how do we have these conversations and how do we get individuals to engage with them? And then when we think about some of the different roles that are going to be enhanced by AI versus disrupted by AI in finance, is a bit on a continuum. So the ones that are really disruptive are kind of like what we saw earlier with Intuit. So things that are more transactional in nature, those most likely will go away first, versus the ones that are enhanced. So such as the CFO, financial analysts, things like that. A lot of that is supported by AI and technology. Does anybody have any questions? So then as we think about, okay, actually like implementing these and like, how do we do this? Kind of the way to say, if I want to add AI to my tech stack, what do I need to do? Is this just another tool I need to go buy? Do I actually need to implement this? Do I need to train and retrain my team? How do I actually go about putting AI into practice? And one of the best techniques that I've seen so far is think about, what are we all putting off? So what's the thing that we're kind of procrastinating on? So like, for example, if you procrastinate on sending emails out to customers at the end of the day. Well, ChatGPT and all the different choose your LLM, they're all really good at drafting emails. So they can draft them in your voice. So like, for example, you can upload examples of your your documentation, and it'll learn your voice. If you really don't like to analyze contracts, it'll help you analyze contracts. So it's things like that that you can think about, okay, what is it that I've been dreading? What is it that I do that's very manual? And those are things that AI can really help with. And then the other thing to think about too is which AI tool is fit for purpose. So like one of the tools you'll see that we're using right now is Beautiful AI. Beautiful AI is great for slides, but I wouldn't go use it to like write a 100-page document, because that's not what it's built for. So just really kind of understanding what the tool is used, it makes it useful for, and how it's going to help you versus kind of slow you down. And then the other thing I'd say is continue to use these tools. So it's kind of like whenever like NetSuite was coming out, or when everything was transitioning from servers to the cloud, it's really just understanding how do we use this new technology, and the way to learn how to use it is to basically continuously use it. And then some of the additional integration considerations that come up are, of course, around data privacy and management, as well as regulatory compliance. And so one of the things I'd say with regulatory compliance, and I'm sure a lot of the individuals on this call work internationally as well as in the US, each jurisdiction is a bit different with how they handle regulation around AI. Europe's actually further along. Right now, there's actually a summit going on in Europe around AI regulation. And the approach to regulating AI in the US was basically regulate later versus develop now. So the thing to think about it is everyone is still thinking about what are the ethics around AI, what is the data management around AI, but everything was built and now they're trying to regulate it. So some of the things they've come up with is really thinking through, like, for example, OpenAI has its SOC 2 testing done, but some of these earlier stage companies may not have those type of controls in place. So it's always kind of like when we implement systems, is really thinking through what that looks like. So then now what, I'll pause. Does anybody have any other questions or anything? Great. So one of the things we'll do too is we'll go into an example here, but one of the examples we'll go over for, we're going to use ChatGPT. And with ChatGPT, the way it works is it works through everything called prompting. And so the fancy name for all of that is really around prompt engineering. And so prompt engineering, in particular with finance, what we're finding is prompt engineering is basically like talking to somebody. And so with talking to someone, it's kind of like giving an individual, so like a controller or a financial manager, if you give them good directions, you know, it'll work well. If you give them less clear instructions, it may not work as well. And so when you think about how to actually give a explanation to this tool, what's coming up as ways to make this work successfully is that usually the more details you give it, the better the results are. And also if you give it good context, it works better from that perspective too. And so there's been a lot of acronyms out there, and individuals can kind of take and choose what acronyms make the most sense. But some of the things we found is when you think about what works for prompt engineering and finance is really defining the objective. So saying, like, for example, you can tell ChatGPT, assume you're a financial analyst, or you could say, assume you're Tony Robbins. And interestingly enough, because of the amount of data and how the data was consumed, it'll know that it's Tony Robbins. And then you'll tell, like, leverage domain specific terminology. So one of the things here is always make sure you're defining what you're doing before you actually tell it to do something. And then the other piece here is to break down complex requests. So if you're going to upload financial data, one of the better practices is to upload the data and then ask it to take some time to review the data before you begin. And then the other piece around it is to encourage transparency. And you'll see this is really to ask it to kind of think about its processes and what it's doing. And so this is kind of called chain of thought prompting from that perspective. So the prompt we'll go through is we'll actually go through a prompt where we'll talk about to ChatGPT about analyzing NVIDIA's financials. And then I'll also show you there's a actual, what they call a GPT that can create prompts for you. So in the event you say, okay, I don't really understand how to create prompts, or I don't want to take the time to figure this out, here's how I do that. But before we start, does anybody have any questions? Okay.
I do.
Sure. What's up?
Hi, Julianne. Thank you for this. This is great. Quick question. I'm assuming this is on a paid subscription, correct?
So that's a great question. So there's both free and paid. And then actually with a lot of these, they now have multiple versions of paid. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you I'd say the mid-tier with ChatGPT now, but you can do this on a free version as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And the big difference between what I'm showing you versus the paid version is, since this is the paid version, ChatGPT's paid version will go out to the internet, versus the free version, you have to upload the data from that perspective. So the first thing we'll do with this is so if you want to go find a GPT, and what I mean by GPT is kind of like an app. So think about like if you have your iPhone, or if you use Android and you want to download something, that's kind of what that is. It's similar to an app store. So I had downloaded an app called Prompt Engineer. And so what this does is, if I want to really understand how to build prompts, this is a good tool for that. And there's other ones out there too. But the first thing I want to do is I want to say, okay, because we're going to do a financial analysis and we're going to figure out, okay, we're going to look at NVIDIA's financials and then we're going to create a projection around it. So I want to create a prompt that's going to help me do that. So I'm going to ask it to create a prompt to support a financial analysis of my 3-year financial statements, or any 3-year financial statement, so I can reuse it. And you'll see it's thinking about it. And then, by the way, over the past couple of days, ChatGPT has been doing A/B testing on my version, so you might see that pop up here. And by A/B testing, I mean it'll give me 2 examples and ask me what I like better. So that's the other thing I'd say is in real time, you'll see it sometimes update or kind of refresh or do odd things, kind of like a person. And so what it did once it did this analysis is it said, okay, here's how to build this actual prompt. So this is the prompt that we would actually put in when we get over here and we say, okay, this is what we're going to tell ChatGPT to do, which is, you are a highly skilled person, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I want you to find. And here's how I want you to actually analyze the financial statements. And as you can see, we're asking it to look at revenue trends, liquidity analysis, all the standard things we'd want a good financial analyst to do. And then also provide comparative and industry benchmarking and provide recommendations. And then down here, here's a key part too, because we're telling it to ensure our analysis is clear, structured, and supported by financial metrics. And then also kind of explain certain thorough items as well. One of the things I like about this GPT is it explains why the prompt is well structured or why it's not too. Because the other thing you can do too is you could write, if you write a prompt here, you could type that into this and you could say, hey, can you fix my prompt? And it will do that for you. So then we'll go over into actual ChatGPT. And one thing I point out too, and this is in the free version as well as what I should note is there's a high-end version of ChatGPT called ChatGPT Research. That's like $200 a month, and that can actually produce now like a PhD level research report. But what they now have is they have multiple models. And so some of this is planned because OpenAI is working on building better and better models for us to use. And then some of it is actually a response to what happened with DeepSeek coming out last week or a couple weeks ago. So they're continuously building. So what'll happen is like in a month, we may come out here and we may see a different ChatGPT version. So then let's take that prompt I just got. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to do this, pull the stock prices for NVIDIA. And tell it's a financial analyst. And by telling it's a financial analyst, it also sets it with a mindset of, hey, here's what I'm doing, as opposed to just kind of doing what its own. And you see, so I asked it to pull the stock prices and also analyze the financial performance. And so it pulled the stock prices. What's nice is it'll usually tell you where it comes from. It'll tell me about the financial growth. And it'll give, here's the different financial performance, here's the revenue. And then it tells me, okay, it also decided to tell me I can refer to their official report. So sometimes they'll just say that too. So what I would also say with it is sometimes you're never quite sure what you'll get from ChatGPT as well.
They can't grab their data?
You can grab the data. So you can grab the data and you can also grab, you can also go to the link. So like you can come here and you can see the source too.
I have another question.
Sure.
The app, the
Yep.
prompt engineer app, that is a separate app from ChatGPT?
It's an app within ChatGPT.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, so you can come over here and you can, well, it's not coming up for me. It's, oh, it's here. It's Explore GPTs.
Okay,
So like, it's like almost like the App Store is the way to think about it.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then what I also like to do, so best practice, so we can see here on my sidebar, these are all different chats. And then there's a setting feature, so you can have it delete chats if you don't want it to keep your chats. But whenever you're talking about a same topic, keeping the same chat window open is really helpful because then it remembers that you're talking about the same chat. If you want to like a brand new chat, then you just come up here and you say, okay, new chat, and then that starts a new topic. So if you're kind of bouncing around, I mean, once you get into this, some days I'll be talking to it about NVIDIA, and then I don't know, I might ask it a random other question around what's the weather like. So keeping those two chat windows separate helps keep it from getting confused. Just kind of like a person. And so then let's take the prompt. And then since I already told it was a financial analyst, I don't necessarily need to tell it that it's a financial analyst again, but we'll do that anyway. So you can do that too. You can see, so I took that prompt, which I could have written that on myself, but it's easier just to copy and paste, and I asked it to analyze NVIDIA's financials. And then it's also telling me the data came from its annual reports. And the thing also too to keep in mind is always double check the work, because lately it's usually accurate, but some days it may or may not be as accurate as you'd hope, especially with financial data. So then what it did was it did exactly what I asked it to do, which was I asked it to look at liquidity, efficiency ratios, cash flow. So it did all the different trends, pulled all that up. And now, so since I asked it to do all of that, one of the things that I've learned is really helpful is I ask it to review its own analysis and tell me what gaps are missing, or also ask it if it was to give us additional information, or if it was given additional information, what would be helpful for it. And then what this does is it helps it stop and think about what it just gave you. And then it tells you, okay, here's what else I could do. So it's kind of basically what we're doing is we're almost having a conversation at this point.
Hey, Julianne, quick question.
Sure.
Thanks for going through this. This is really helpful. You touched on something that was a question of mine in the accuracy. What's been your experience working with ChatGPT and some other AI platforms around accuracy? Have you seen many issues? Kind of what have you seen? What have you heard?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, Randy. So it depends on the day. So it's gotten this past week or so, it's gotten better. About 2 weeks, I think, when they were running before they came out with their new model, it was a little buggy. I alternate for financial analysis like this. I alternate between ChatGPT and Anthropic. And the reason for that is Anthropic is a bit stronger when it gets to equations, and then ChatGPT is stronger when it gets to, and we'll probably see this when it comes up here, is it gets stronger to actually doing visualizations. So I was doing actually an analysis on a debt term sheet, and I had to use both tools to get what I needed, because I was building an Excel model of the IRR calculation. And so between the two, I was able to get a foundation that I could then take into Excel. And so it just is kind of picking between the different tools, is how I describe it.
Okay. And if you were to upgrade, if like you talked about, there's different levels now. If you upgrade the platform, I'm assuming they're equally as accurate. Is that fair?
That is a fair assumption, because the upgrade on ChatGPT does not help with financial analysis right now. It helps with academic research. So what that's built for, it actually kind of slow. So it's built for building out like basically research reports on if you wanted to understand the science behind oncology studies, for example, or something like that. And so it's actually kind of, it moves slower, but it moves deeper. And so the last iteration from last week, it will actually give you, it's supposed to give you like a full PhD dissertation report, is how that one is being used right this second.
No, this is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good point. And it's really just understanding, and it's hard because they're moving so fast, but it's understanding what each tool can do and what its limitations are, as well as its benefits. Yeah, so what this did was it told me, okay, here's its limitations on what the gaps were. And so it said so of course it's in a good mood. So it said it gave itself a strong foundation. But it really wants to see more granularity in revenue, expense breakdown and cost structure, benchmarking, cash flows. Okay, and then this was the one that has risks and external factors. So got that again today. So regulatory and geopolitical factors. And then what's nice is then it'll tell you what the next steps are. And so it'll say, here's the additional stuff it wants to work on. And then it will ask you if it wants you to do any of this additional data for deeper dive. And then let's see if it'll do this today. So what I'm going to ask it to do is based on what it's done so far, can it actually build a model to predict their revenue and their stock price over the next 3 to 5 years? Actually, let's see. Okay, and so now it's doing, so this is where it starts. It's going to tell you how it's going to do the analysis, and then sometimes, and then it should do the analysis. Yeah, see, and today it's not doing it. So I'll show you guys what it looks like before. And then let's do before that though, as I go back to your analysis. Yeah, and so what's nice is, so I asked it to go back to the analysis it just previously did and then pull on the regulatory and macroeconomic trends. And so then it can do that too. So it'll also go back to some of the previous questions. But I'll show you because it won't get there today. It's funny, it depends on the afternoon sometimes. But what it did yesterday when I walked through the same thing was yesterday it said, okay, well build this model. And it'll consider revenue, stock, price predictions. It actually built the model. And you can see it put it in Excel for me. It built what's nice, and this is different. ChatGPT will do this, Anthropic won't, but Anthropic will give you like, here's how to put this into a Excel model or a Python model. It built the regression analysis. And then it actually gave the takeaways on what the revenue forecast looks like. Here's the trajectory. And it asked me, okay, does it want to add additional assumptions or variables into the model? And then since what it did here, the charts aren't interactive right now. So I asked it, okay, well, that's great, but I don't really know what I can do with that yet. So I asked, okay, can you give me the Excel formulas? And this is where they're actually really helpful, especially if you're still learning Excel. It gives you the Excel formulas that it used. And then you can take those Excel formulas. In fact, this actually tells you where to even put this on the page and put it into Excel. And then here's the final output. So that's what's really nice. And then actually, I didn't go through with this final one, but it said it can actually provide you with Excel with the formulas pre-filled too.
Can I ask you a question, Julianne?
Of course.
Two actually. So if it produces an Excel spreadsheet, how do you actually get it transferred into Excel that you could save on your computer, et cetera, et cetera? Is there a copy function?
There is. So let's see if it'll remember this from yesterday. You just download it at that point. And if it doesn't download, then it's just you copy paste into Excel or Word.
Right, right. The other question is, let's say you want to do something similar like this with your own results, your own company. So let's say you have QuickBooks and you have, all of last year and you ask it to do analysis. At this stage, does QuickBooks internal AI do this sort of thing? Or you would say ChatGPT, can you give ChatGPT access to your own QuickBooks system?
Claude can do that. That's the agent piece of it, David. So Claude can do that better than OpenAI can. But you have to build the link. And so you can build, and so that's where the concept of the finance agent comes in. So here, this is if it just built it. Let's see if it actually built the formulas. Looks like it didn't. Or maybe it did. Yeah, so it put numbers in. So it did build the formulas. So yeah, you can. So that was, just tested it. So you can build it. And the way the agents work are you build and train the agent to then go into QuickBooks. The recommendation would be to keep, this is where it gets challenging, is you'd have to create QuickBooks to have a separate access. And so that gets a little bit more complicated. So I say that's very early stage is where it's at, is everyone says they can do it, but it's still being built out is how I would describe that particular type of technology.
Julianne.
And is that the same for NetSuite and others? They've got AI incorporated, but there's a limit to what it can do, I guess, right?
They are, yeah. So the way they work, so I'm not as fully familiar with NetSuites yet, because I haven't seen that one turned on. I know, like, for example, Adaptives, the way it works on, so Adaptives under Workday, Adaptives does a linear regression technology. So theirs learns, like, it can't do brand new predictive technology like this one just did, but, well, it kind of can, but it can do it if it has, it can learn if you have like 2 to 3 years of data, it will predict it. So because we have it implemented in one of our biotechs, but where it struggles is if I'm trying to do like a brand new clinical study that's never been done. But if I had 2 to 3 years of data, it could it has AI capabilities to predict trends.
But Julianne,
Understood.
just
Thank you.
wanted to comment on that. I mean, you can, David, for you can, download your financials to a spreadsheet and then sanitize them because you don't really want to publish the company name, and then upload the spreadsheet into ChatGPT and do the same analysis. So you don't necessarily have to connect it to QuickBooks at this point, although Operator does connect to QuickBooks and you can make that happen pretty easy. But you can do that analysis. I mean, you could, depending on the data you have in there, dump it in the spreadsheet and do it that way, and just upload it into ChatGPT and do the prompt.
As we were talking, that's exactly what I was thinking, because with QuickBooks, you can, it's very easy. That's great. Fantastic.
Plus it'll read PDFs. You don't even have to do a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
Cool.
And then the
Julianne,
go ahead.
hey, Julianne, just taking David and Sam's example to just understand the consistency of it. If you downloaded that data and uploaded it, like, let's say today's Wednesday, and you did the analysis, and then if you did the same exercise on Friday, would you get the same results, or is it going to vary, assuming it's the exact same data?
It's getting more consistent, I'd say, because I know that's what they're focused on. I would not say 100% accuracy, but I know that's what they're trying for. So for the most part, when I repeat these, like, for example, as we just saw, I did the same exercise here that I did yesterday, and it just gave me a slightly different result because they are testing these models, and these models are evolving.
Yep. Very
Randy,
quickly, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Randy, my experiences have been very consistent. I do it, with a lot of small businesses and do financial analysis. I've been for some time with ChatGPT, and I find the results to be pretty consistent.
Oh, good to know. All right, thank you.
Good. And talking about errors, yesterday I asked it about the impact of Trump's tariff moves, and it understood that what Trump's tariff moves are. And then I asked it, who is currently the president of the United States? And it said Joseph Biden. And I said, no, I think you're wrong. And it says, oh, yes, thank you so much. So that's a good example of why you got to check some of this stuff, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's still like what they call human in the loop, and why we're still all needed. And then, like, here's another tool. So speaking of specific tools, this one's being used at certain universities, but this one is Julius AI. And you do have to clean the data before you upload it. And it has a free version as well as a paid version. But if you have clean data, it can do pretty robust financial analysis as well. So this is one that's actually a fit for purpose AI tool from that perspective. So,
and would you consider it to be superior than GBT for what we're talking about?
It's supposed to be. I would consider it, it's one that you can use. What I recommend doing is finding whatever tool works for you and works for whatever your particular use case is. Because this one is, if you are in a company where you have very standard large volumes of data that always comes out in a tabular format, this becomes a very powerful tool. Whereas this one works really well when you're doing a lot of unstructured data and uploading it, because this can also help clean the data as well.